Hi, welcome to part two of the testimony that we are trying to tell about Janine and what God has done for us during that time and after that time. Thank you for tuning in again and listening.
Meetings on phone calls across the United States because of COVID, and we jumped on a Oklahoma Newcastle meeting, and
What?
Someone began to talk about, it was all about not having worry, being careful for nothing. It talked about that chapter in Philippians, and then it went on into Matthew talking about, not having thought for tomorrow, and just not having those cares and those worries and giving them to God. And someone started a song, and I've been thinking about that song. You don't hear it very often. It talks about, I'm talking about the baby. Oh, you know what I'm talking about?
Nope.
But it talks about the mom delivering this baby, and just having praying. It talks about her old grandpa in the corner, praying all night through, and that God would see them through, and just having faith in that. And it just gave me a lot of courage. I know God was just speaking to me directly, and it started increasing, I think, that faith, and just, well, no matter what, we're just leaving it in God's hands. And from there, I felt like calling a sister here who, a dear friend, but she had went through that. She's lost some children, and I felt like asking her just some questions, what to expect, different things. And she began to give me some advice, and from that, I feel like God told me specifically that we wouldn't have any problems with the authorities, because we had planned to have her at home. And I feel like God just gave me a ton of peace, in where that could have been another trial upon another trial kind of thing. But I just didn't fear. I feel like God just gave me a great amount of peace.
While she's feeling extra peace, I feel like that at this particular moment in time, I wasn't feeling the peace. I wasn't afraid either, but I wasn't feeling a lot of peace because I felt like I was still things that I didn't know. A lot of things I didn't understand. And from the way that God usually talks to me, I usually would have all this information by now. And so I went in my closet and I just talked to the Lord. I said, God, whatever happens is totally up to you. I said, but I'm not feeling a lot of peace right now. And I said, can you just show me how much you love me? That's what I told him. I said, Lord, just show me how much you love me. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't very long after that, there was one of my good buddies from Colorado that had just had a little girl, and I saw it on Instagram, and I was really excited for him, and he called me. And when he called me, I immediately answered the phone. I'm like, hey, congratulations. And he was just calling, sharing that joy and sharing that peace. And we talked for just a second, just for a little bit. But while we talked, I felt the Lord tell me, like, Jericho protocol is over. You can tell this guy about all the stuff that you have in your mind, all the fears, all the worries you have, you can say it. And I told him, I said, it sounds really strange, but I haven't been able to talk to anybody about this yet. And I feel like God's telling me I can talk with you. And I told him a little bit about what was going on, and he just got really sober. And he goes, hey, listen, I got a prophecy a long time ago, and God told me about a gift that he was going to teach me how to use. And he said, what I need you to do right now is I need you to go to a quiet place, find a place and sit down, and we're going to pray. And he was just so, from that moment, he became so affirmative and so direct. And I went and I found a place in the garage, and I knelt down. And from the moment he started praying, it was just like, I can't even explain it anything other than just like a peace came to me and washed, like drenched me. Like I still didn't know what was going to happen, but that peace just drenched me. And after we got done praying together, God gave him some words to say to me to help me kind of move forward in the next coming days. And I know that the Lord sent that. But one of the things that I asked him afterwards, I said, God, if everything's going to be okay, if everything's going to be all right, would you just send me a dream? I don't know this baby's name yet. I don't know if the baby's a boy or girl. I don't know this baby's name yet. Would you just give me a dream? Help me to understand it. And I've had dreams about 2 or 3 different children in my life that God, even before I was married, that God had set aside. And only one of them was there a girl that I had a dream about. But I fast forward to this time, and I went to sleep that night, and I had this really short and really sweet dream. And the dream was Taylor was in labor, and I was, for some reason, at church, at a preaching or something. I was at church. But my mother came up to me, and she was so excited, and she said, "You had a little girl." And she hands me this Bible, and on this Bible, the name says Janine Uday. And it's just like, that's so sweet, because my sister Carla's middle name was Janine, and Carla passed away when I was 23. And so that was such a beautiful thing to me that I never thought about that, to name my child, Carla's middle name, but that would be so sweet. But the name was spelled wrong. It was spelled wrong in a weird and strange way, but I just thought that was so noteworthy in the dream that the name was spelled wrong. And that kind of plays in towards the later part of things.
Yeah. So as labor began, like, nearing the end, it was just a couple days before, I began just preparing everything as I normally would. Just getting the last labor stuff ready in my room, and I was packing up the last, newborn outfit and everything, just getting it all set up. Felt like just continuing in that, even though I felt like I knew what was coming, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to move in faith and just continue on. And as I was literally packing up that the newborn outfit, I feel like God just clearly just kind of showed me a vision. I felt like God told me it was going to be that girl that Michael had dreamed about. And like previously, years ago, he always told me about this girl that he dreamed about. And I didn't even pack up a boy outfit. I just went and put a bow in there and girl and brought it into my room. And labor, do you have anything?
No.
Labor started one morning. Michael was sleeping. I was down with Judah, and the pains began to be pretty real, where I knew that it wasn't just Braxton Hicks or anything. And all day we labored, and I ended up taking Judah, and we kind of knew that it was pretty real, to the sister's house that God had told us to. That
Sister
lived
Trish,
here. Yeah. And we took him over there, and I labored from about 10 that morning until about 12 that night.
Your water broke it right at about
12
midnight.
And labor had gotten pretty intense to that point, and my water broke, and then everything stopped. And
it's like cold, just nothing, no pains.
And we tried everything, tried squatting and eating and walking and resting and everything, and ended up my midwife that had come, that God just sent to us. I hadn't actually asked her, but God just sent her right through the door as we were about to call someone to ask to come be with us. But she ended up going home, getting rest. She's like, we'll rest. And Judah ended up staying over there that night.
And we went and got him the next day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When did I text? I ended up...
You texted your mom that night at about midnight. You texted her
after my water broke and different things. I ended up texting my mom and my sister, who I had asked to watch Judah, to go ahead and come. Because of the labor stalling, that's, once you get into the mind frame of like, okay, it's happening, let's get it done, then the stalling was like just another thing, like, we're just ready for this to be done. And
I felt like God even told us to try to get some rest during that day, but neither one of us could, because we were just like, let's just get through it. It was kind of on our minds.
Yeah. And God sent Doug and Tina Funkhauser over here to pray for us, and prayed that my labor would just be swift and start back up, and that we could just get the ball rolling. And sure enough, my mom and sister ended up showing up that night. Around supper time, we ended up eating supper, and it was about Judah's bedtime, and so we ended up deciding to go get Judah and we brought Judah back, and within about an hour of him being back and was all just chilling in the living room, my pain started up again. And
Madeline ended up having to watch him, which was cool.
Madeline ended up having to watch him that night until I had her. So I know God just worked that out. There was a reason why there was two people, because there was going to be a day in between.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As far as my labor, it was one of my fears, just the pain, different things. And it started back up that night, and I had her the next day at 6:30 in the morning, and my labor was so easy, despite her not helping, despite her being in a very weird position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Despite my water already breaking, it was just...
We were all shocked at how
labor.
It worked.
So much so that my mom and Tina that was here, I said, I think I'm about ready to start pushing. And they were like,
your pains aren't hard enough,
kind of thing. They didn't tell me that, of course. They were like, okay, if you feel it, go. But God just blessed. So.
In less than an hour of like the actual like getting into the nitty gritty of it, like Janine was here and in the world. But what was really cool was we also had a neighbor that she told us later that she woke up at about 6:30. Janine was born at 6:38. She woke up at about 6:30, and God told her, "You need to pray for Taylor. You need to pray for her right now." And I thought that was like a really cool thing. God had put us on so many different people's minds. And meanwhile, at this time, I feel like that I still am pretty dead set on, even though something is not going to be okay and something's not going to happen right, that God has been showing me to read all of these chapters and these scriptures about these amazing miracles and wonderful works of faith, that I had been so focused on that I'm thinking to myself, whatever happens, God's going to use me in some Elisha type way, whatever it is. And I just had to try to make sure my faith was where it needed to be, because I full on expected to be raising a little girl right now. That was my absolute total expectation. But of course, after Taylor actually had the baby and I saw her face, there wasn't a lack of faith, because I could clearly see that she wasn't alive. When I saw her face, I stopped thinking that there was going to be an act to bring her back to life, simply because at that moment, I can't really explain it any way other than saying I recognized that it wasn't God's will. And I think for me, that's when a big portion of my actual trial started. Like I felt something in me break. It's just like there's something inside of me, and it sounds super cliche, but something inside of my heart actually broke. Like I felt it when I was sitting in the bathroom staring through the door at Janine. And from that point, everybody knows that I'm the one that does the talking in the relationship when it's communicating with people, whatever it might be. From that point, I was rendered pretty much useless. I called the authorities and had them come over to the house, but I pretty much laid behind Taylor the entire time they were there. I just laid down behind her because something weird was going on with me and I was in a whole other battle. But that calmness and that peace that she had kind of came back around.
Yeah, I feel like there was a reason God had told me to call a sister that had already been there, and it just washed over me. And I feel like I knew, I was just calm. I was able to speak, and they were extremely sweet, and
she just looked good. Her color looked good. Her recovery, everything looked really good. And like, she just was so coherent and had all of her wits and thoughts about her to have just lost a child and also just gone through labor. It was quite astounding. And they even commented on it a couple of times. But yeah, when they got there, they were very sweet and understanding and compassionate. Yeah.
All the God's, testament. They ended up taking my blood pressure and it was like perfect. And God just did that, because if you know me, I'm a worry person, labor, I'm scared to death of it. And we'd obviously just lost our child, but especially having a kid at home. I think when you have a child at home, a lot of times authorities aren't super excited about that concept because they feel like that maybe things could go differently if you were under supervision or under their care in a lot of ways. And so there was definitely a nervousness that was there, and especially the sister she had talked to beforehand.
talked about her process, and one of the midwives that was there with us had already seen that process before, so there was an expectation of kind of how these people were going to be whenever they came in and how they were going to deal with us, but it was like so different. At one point, the primary EMT or emergency responder that's out here at Bargersville, he came in and he said, hey, listen, and there was a sheriff that came with him, and he said, hey, listen, I know that this is not the way you planned on starting your day, you know, and I want to try to be as sensitive as I can, but I got to ask a couple of questions. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is going to go long. And he simply asked us, you know, our names, our ages, and the baby's name, and kind of got out of our hair. You know, it was just like a really, God just made that process go extremely smoothly. And he informed us that there would be somebody reaching out to us from one of the funeral homes that was nearby and to try to connect with us. So
I'll do a test that God had just set it up that way. God had said that before. God had said that the authorities were to me that there was going to be peace. God had told us before that we were going to lose our girl. God's plan is perfect. No matter what, and He's for us. And I've heard people say, and it doesn't bother me at all, but I've heard people say that, you know, it could have been, you hear people say, it could have been a lot worse, you know, you could have had her and then something could have been wrong with her, or you could have had her for a few months and then lost her, or a few years, or it could have been better. You could have just had a miscarriage early on. You didn't have to go through the 9 months in labor. But I think I like to try to portray that no matter what, it's not better or worse, because God's will is just God's will, and it's perfect.
He's there all the way.
And it's good. If God said yes, it's not just because He's sovereign, but He also loves us very, extremely much, and it's for a purpose. It's for the bettering of our souls.
I think that with that being said, I think that was what I wasn't fully getting at first. I think my heart broke and I wasn't there, because this miracle that he's talking to me about, I'm thinking it as much to a physical sort. I am 1,000% certain that I'm getting ready to raise this baby girl and all the things. I even had it in my mind, all the people that I was going to like send her a picture to, because there were people that were worried. There were people that would reach out to us throughout this pregnancy that we didn't say anything to, that were worried, and God had showed them things. And I thought about all the people I was going to send pictures to and just be like, you know, this is, you know. But it wasn't until everything started happening afterwards that I realized that God is working a miracle. It's just a very different kind than one that I've experienced beforehand. And while we're going to try to explain how some of that worked, it's just, you just got to trust that a lot of the work that was done internally in us and in our lives, and how that works. I know a lot of people that have been through what we've been through. Several of them came by and said, you're in a fog right now, you're in a haze right now, it's not going to hit you until this point, it's not going to hit you until that point. And I think I can successfully say, at least for me, there were several times where it did hit me. It absolutely did hit me. And it was just like, it was a sadness that all the things were there, like the emotions and those things were there. But I never once felt the absence of God's hand. And every time I felt like I would sink to a strange spot or like a dark spot, He would do something else, or He would show something else. One of the biggest things for me was I could not reconcile in my mind planning my daughter's funeral and like going through that process. And I knew that was going to fall on me, and Taylor had to be in bed for 10 days. And anytime somebody brought up a question, like my family would reach out and say, well, when do we need to come down, or what do we need to do? And of course it's in the middle of COVID, so only 10 people can be here, and just a lot of things were there. But every time that I got to a point of trying to think about it, my brain just stopped. It wouldn't go anywhere, and it just didn't do anything. I went upstairs while Taylor was in bed, and I told her, I said, you got to pray for me, because I can't wrap my mind around doing this process. And people keep asking me questions. I know that time is of the essence here. And she said, let's pray right now. And so we just immediately stopped right then, and we prayed that God would work this out in such a way where I would know that it was Him, and everything would be calm. Because, you know, we're in Indiana, all of our family's back in Oklahoma. Carl and my uncle Godfrey are buried in Oklahoma. Just like the whats, the wheres, and the whens, and all these things were difficult.
But to another testament, one of our fears right before, as fear began to creep in this, the unknown, I asked Michael, because several had offered in Oklahoma, you can come down here, you have a baby here, have a more personal relationship. It's a smaller town, we know people better. kind of different things. And I asked Michael, and he said, okay, we just decided let's pray about it separately, come together that night and see what God said. And we both felt like God said specifically to stay in Indiana. In fact, I feel like God told us to move to Indiana for this purpose. And so we did. We did what God had already set up. And because of that.
Yeah. And God showed Taylor when she was pregnant with Judah that we would be in Indiana for this pregnancy, for this process. Yeah. So we knew we were supposed to stay here, but we tried to kind of avoid that in the levels of comfortability, but God still wanted it to happen. But nonetheless, I got to that point where I was just kind of really struggling, trying to get these things situated, and finally ended up making a call because we had some questions that we didn't understand how they were going to work. Made a call to the funeral home that currently had Janine. And he began to like ask us things almost from a standpoint of like assurance. He's like, well, we're going to do it this way. And he began to kind of tell us how things worked. And he gave very limited options. And as I began to ask more questions, he said, well, Love Lucas already takes care of these things. And I said, Love Lucas. And I remembered that right after Janine passed, I talked to my buddy John, and John knew a guy out here who lost his son. He lost his son, and from that, the ministry that God gave him was to create this program where anybody that loses a baby or an infant, he helps out with the funeral costs as long as they are in a certain area and they use a certain graveside and things of that nature. He can help out with that. And John just kind of said it, but it was more in passing. I think my mind was clouded. I didn't think anything about it. But the guy says, yeah, Love Lucas takes care of all these different things. And the things that he began to start saying to me were all the questions that I had and all the things that I was worried about. And they solidified something that I'd already felt. And it was just so smooth. It was so without any sort of tumult or tumultuousness. It was just very, very smooth. And the only thing that was different, he said, I'm going to fax you this or I'm going to email you this and have you sign it and send it back. Whenever he emailed the document over, it had Janine's name spelled wrong on there. And ordinarily, I would immediately send it back and say, oh, well, this is spelled wrong. But for some reason, that dream came back to my mind. I felt like the Lord was just saying, this is kind of the way I want it. And I'm showing you all this beforehand. So it was just another bit of peace for me. I just signed it and I sent it back. And during COVID, that was one of the times where God again showed his hand, because that funeral home was willing to actually bring Janine here to our home and let us have a funeral in the house right here with our family that was there, which is super atypical. And it was just really quite wonderful. And I found out later that the reason why they were so bent over backwards is the funeral director himself had also lost a son in the same manner. And it's just like God was connecting each one of us through the same sorrow, through the same struggle. We'd walk down the street and neighbors would talk to us about similar struggles. And like God was connecting each person through this, what seems to be what would be a really dark and a hard thing. God was making it a glory to his name.
Yeah, the funeral. And we just had an outpour of love just in general from all realms of our life in every manner possible. And it truly means a lot just to just say I'm thinking about you. We appreciate all the love. But on the day of the funeral, I love birds. I feel like God sends them to me at special times. For me personally, in my walk with him. But I prayed that day that God would send me just a special bird at the funeral, just to know that just to feel that peace, to know that he was there and she was in good hands. And just as soon as they ended up taking her, Michael was the only one that went to the graveside with her, and they walked out of the room, and just a couple of us looked in the room, and this huge bird flew from this tree. That was a whole nother testimony. In the time that we've spent in Indiana in the winter, it was rainy 24/7, drowsy, dreary, and I'm a sunshine girl. I love sunshine. And the week leading up to labor, during my 10 days that I had to be in bed, everyone commented on how beautiful it was, the weather, the sunshine. There was the trees had just blossomed. I was able to, even though I had to stay in bed, there was just this beautiful tree right out my window, white, beautiful. And even though the weather, I would check every morning and it said it would rain, it was supposed to rain, and it never did. And but anyway, I prayed for that bird, and this huge bird just flew from that tree just right out my window and almost hit our window. It's just the wingspan of almost our whole window, and it flew and almost hit our window and just went right up. I imagine on the roof or something, but I know God did that just to reaffirm, and He didn't have to.
It was kind of a day of reaffirmation like that. I think for me, honestly, I was still to that point because all the things that I'd felt before, I was still to the point where I thought, well, God could still do something, because God had me read the story about Lazarus and how long he had been dead. And that was just rolling in my mind. So I actually went to the graveside by myself, still thinking, if God's going to do a work, I don't want anybody that doesn't have any faith around me. I just want to go by myself and be there. And of course I showed up, and the funeral director was there also, and he stood about 10 yards off while I stood by the graveside, and I waited to feel this overwhelming call to do something. But as I sat by there, I realized that again, it came back to me and just hit me like a ton of bricks, that it was not God's will. And I began to try to say a prayer, but the only things that came out was just that how thankful I was that God had allowed her to be with him, and praying that God would allow us to see her from time to time in our dreams, or just to comfort us from time to time. And that funeral director came from far back, and he started talking with me, and he's telling me about his son that he lost. And he said there came a time though where I began to understand that what had happened, and I began to understand that I wouldn't change it for anything. I wouldn't bring him back. And then he looked at me almost as if he knew what I was there to try to do. And he said, Michael, he said, even if I had the power, I wouldn't bring him back. And I said, that was my moment to tell God, okay, I get it. I understand. And I came back, and Taylor's prophecy talking about understanding the timing of all things. With COVID, there was a merger at my job with Sprint and T-Mobile. They kind of merged together at the same time. So there was a lot of downtime where we could just kind of be. And at the same time, the timing of that, God was showing me all these things in faith. And one might say, well, why would God tell you to read all these things about all this faith and have all this faith if he wasn't going to bring her back? And I think God knew me more than anything. I've been in situations where I felt like that my faith wasn't strong enough or wasn't large enough to see something. And I think, it hindered something. And I think that God knew I don't know if I'd have been able to be okay with myself if I felt like it was my faith that hindered being able to raise Janine.
And God loved you specifically and knew your personality just enough where he told you to read all that.
He prepared me for a year to get my mind wrapped around all the right things, which was beautiful.
So there's just peace that follows.
And it was after the funeral, after that day, that's when even more magical things started happening. And I talked about Sprint and T-Mobile merging. I had people that didn't even know me from T-Mobile, and I had people that didn't know me from Sprint. They were reaching out to us, and they were talking to us, and they were praying for us. They were sending love. And somebody even called me and said, I don't know if you know this, but people are starting to have really good conversations about God at work because of you and your wife and the scenario that you went through. And at that moment, I thought to myself, well, it would have been really nice to send pictures of her to all the people I work with and welcome in the new addition to the family, and for them to rejoice with me for a day or two, but they would have forgotten, because they're not in my everyday life. What a more beautiful and enduring testimony for them to start communicating about God through the struggle, and about how many people were waking up to that, which I thought was really, really wonderful. And I struggle a lot. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this part. This part I still struggle with from time to time, and it is the fact that my sister Carla died before I was married or had any children, and I can hardly look at my son Judah because I know she would be obsessed with him and in love with him, and I always just wish I could have watched her play with him for a day. But somebody called me. I had one of my really close friends call me, and he was like, hey, just wanted to talk to you. And we chatted for a little bit, and then he said, how cool is it that now Carla has a sweet baby to rock? And when he said it, I don't know why I didn't think about it before, but it just exploded my heart and my mind with joy that somewhere, I don't know how it all works until everything is done and Jesus comes back and cracks the sky, but somewhere, somehow, I know that my Daugter gets to keep my sister company and they together are in the same presence of one another. That's almost too much to think about. And that made me really, really joyous. And God has just been pouring out love to us ever since from all facets, all over the place. But that, it doesn't conclude our testimony. I think that concludes like the part that we can package in a video and like send and share it with everybody. But I think the biggest picture is that God is still working. He's still doing so many things. From right after all this happened, Taylor got really sick, worse than she had been sick before. I got really sick and I'm still kind of dealing with things and back and forth. And God, no matter what trial comes and what bad thing comes, he just keeps on showing up. And we hope that by vlogging and by communicating about these things, that it really makes everybody's eyes look back towards the Lord through whatever you may be going through, whatever you, there's been a lot of people here of late that are struggling with a very similar struggle that we went through, and just want to be able to say from the other side of it that he's always good, but he's kind. He's always good, but God is kind to us.
Yeah. And don't let fear get the best of you. I think whatever, even if it's a little thing in the back of your mind, like, yeah, I'm watching this, but what if I had to lose a child? Or, yeah, I'm watching this, but what if I had to go through that cancer that this person's going through? Or whatever your fear is. It could be confronting something that you've done. It could be whatever it might be. Have faith over fear. Step out of that boat looking to Jesus, or you're gonna sink, of course, and he's got you. So I think that,
you know, we all consider ourselves, I say we all, assuming I'm talking to like-minded people, a lot of times we consider ourselves to be Christians, and we love thinking about what Christ did for us. We love thinking about his goodness and his sacrifice, that he would live his life and he would die for us. When you get to thinking about those types of things, it's at that moment you ask yourself, what better way can we show God our appreciation by allowing our lives to be a testimony for him? By allowing the things we go through, positive and negative, all inclusive, just to everything to shine back and be a testimony to him and say, hey, he's real, he's here, and what he did was good. So,
amen.
Love you guys.
Love you guys.